welcome from Groundswell today. We are launching a special series of the Farmer's Guardian podcast, brought to you by the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper Adams University. First session today is on biodiversity, and I'm delighted to be joined by my three lovely panellists here to contribute to this discussion. So Mike, if you can start us off.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Mike Wilkins, farming in North Wiltshire. We're predominantly arable, but we've also got a mix of menagerie of different rare breed animals which we're trying to incorporate into our arable system. And just really think that the regenerative approach is something that we're really passionate to pursue on the farm. And I think a way of making a productive system sustainable is just vital for the future of agriculture. So that's why I feel really strongly about it.
Thank you, Mike. And Ben?
Morning, my name is Ben Adams. I am a farmer and consultant from Oxfordshire. The farm at home is predominantly arable as well, but we have a few flying flocks of sheep coming in for grazing, cover crops, cereals and permanent grassland. I was previously a net zero competition winner for the School of Sustainable Food and Farming last year, so I'm currently conducting trials on intercropping, the growing of more than one crop at the same time to take to harvest with zero inputs, so relying on all the pieces of integrated pest management to basically pull that off, and that's where biodiversity is key to being able to make that a success effectively.
Brilliant, thanks Ben. And Darcy?
Hiya, I'm Darcy Johnson. We are a small beef and arable farm in the heart of Wiltshire, and I'm also a student at Harper Adams at the moment on my placement as a McDonalds Progressive Young Farmer. And yeah, just keen to bring sort of a more nature-friendly food approach to farming on the farm at home. I think it's two sides of the same coin really, so I think it's really important to integrate it in and looking to bring that onto the farm at home.
What I found really interesting in all your introductions there is that you are all saying how biodiversity contributes to that resilient farm business. Can you all just give an example? So Mike, first off, how are you trying to strengthen biodiversity on your farm?
So we're looking at things like we're doing a lot more companion cropping with our cash crops, just to try and bring a little bit more biodiversity into what would otherwise be big monocultures across the farm. So both from a crop protection perspective and also to bring that extra element of biodiversity into the crop. We're also looking to we are bringing herbal lays into the rotation as well, and again just replacing what would otherwise be a monoculture cash crop with a much more biodiverse crop longer term within the rotation, which is also reducing our inputs. Where we're doing that as well, we're doing soil carbon testing to try and monitor how we can affect, maintain and hopefully increase soil carbon within the rotation as well. So all of those things, it's helping us diversify our cropping, spread the risk a little bit more, and also reduce our reliance on nitrogen fertilizer, for example, across a rotation, so we can still target it at high-yielding milling weeks, for example, to get quality, to produce that food for human consumption, and bring in the biodiverse lays to feed livestock as well as part of the rotation. So it's bringing that biodiversity to the farm and to the system and to the ecosystem that the farm functions in, whilst also being a productive food-producing part of the farm.
And I think that point around spreading risk is so important, isn't it? Ben, in terms of on your farm, what are the kind of key things that you're doing to drive biodiversity?
The key thing would be, as one Mike already just mentioned, it's doing it rotationally, so not focusing on the whole thing on just one crop, this is my diverse bit. Yeah. Doing it over the whole rotation, that's brilliant, and keeping that high yielding milling wheat still as part of that. So we're using the SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, within our rotation as break crops, so doing a winter bird food into a spring sown legume fallow, and that is massively beneficial to all the biodiversity across the farm. I've seen it already, it looks blimmin' brilliant. Yeah. But also it's really quite profitable. Across the arable area, we're grossing £466 a hectare, which is double what the basic payment was. And the Sustainable Farming Incentive is a really good way of getting farmers down that regenerative route, if you want to call it that, and just to a more sustainable method of farming.
It's changing a mindset, isn't it?
It is,
really?
Definitely. Take those poor areas out. And that idea of yield.
Yes. Because I think for so long we've got that idea of high productive crops and that yield, but actually if you're working with the environment, you can just get a high yielding crop that way as well. But it's a long-term goal, isn't it? And I'm sure, you know, in all your systems, you've had challenges along the way whilst implementing this.
Definitely, I think exactly as Ben was saying, how important the SFI is in making a lot of these things work. Same when I mentioned our companion cropping, we're using the SFI options to help fund our companion cropping as well. We were doing it on a smaller scale before on targeted crops like oilseed rape, where it really had a financial benefit to us, but now we get that extra funding through SFI. Suddenly it makes it a much more sustainable option financially to bring that other level of sustainability to the farm from an environmental point of view. So I think that funding is absolutely vital to help sort of nudge farmers in that direction.
Would you say we have got that SFI scheme right now, or is there still... I know, it's a very broad question.
What a minefield you jumped into there.
Or do you think there is still progress to be made? Obviously, from where we started to where we are now, I think we have to applaud the progress that we have made.
Oh, 100%. It's definitely going in the right direction. I'm very happy with where it's going. It's taken a lot of time and it's very confusing and it's constantly being updated and changed.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to keep seeing that, but it's definitely heading in the right way. There's quite a few tweaks that do need to be made, but
I think they'll come in time, won't they? I think there's like over 100 options now, which is, a lot of progression.
Options,
yeah,
but
a lot
it is
of progression
information
from where we've come from, and it allows you to be a little bit more flexible depending on your farming system.
As you say, the coming in time bit is the biggest. Like, I'm really quite happy with where, especially the latest SFI options that came out in May, looks really, really strong. A bit annoyed that I just made a big 2,000 acre plan based on the old scheme, and now I'm having to rewrite it for the new one, which is really annoying. But the new one looks really great. I feel we should have had that 6 years ago.
Yes.
And that's the big issue.
For farmers listening to this, for those really kind of embarking on the beginning of this regenerative farming journey, if there was one thing that they could implement on their farm right now in terms of biodiversity, what would it be? And I know obviously all farm systems are different, but if there was one thing that you feel like all farmers need to be...
Well, I would say, farmers know their land better than anyone. And I think you just need to be able to identify the patches on your farm that are possibly less productive. Your headlands maybe aren't producing as well as they might be in the centre of your field, or your corner, a bit of a damp corner. Maybe think if you put some, field margins into grass or wild bird flowers. I know, Mike, you've done a bit of that at home and seen a lot of success. I think just recognising actually where you can add value and add biodiversity, which long-term will benefit your farm, is important to recognise and identify on your farm at home.
Absolutely.
no, I'm sure every single farm has at least 10% of their land that they don't make any money on, if not lose money on. Take that out, stop pouring inputs into that bit of land and put it into something that's easy to manage. You can manage with your labour machinery constraints, say. Don't go and put a whole load of AB15 in and then realise that you've got to buy a 6-metre topper to go over it all. Lots of people do that. Make it fit within your system, and that's how it can work. It could just be location dependent. You might have a beef farmer down the road that needs a load of summer grazing, so you might want to put in a herbal lay for a couple of years on some poorer producing fields, or it might be some flying flock you want to get into graze some cover crops over the winter. It's all location dependent. Get down the pub, get to the local farm tours and just get chatting to your neighbours.
But that's why, things like SFI need to have that flexibility, because all farm systems are so different, that we need to be able to have a pick and choose mentality to it.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, in terms of taking the areas of the farm that aren't profitable, to turn that into a way of bringing biodiversity onto the farm and make them financially profitable, that's sort of the whole point, I think, in the direction of travel of the new payment systems, is to bring a way of pushing farmers into a more sustainable direction as a replacement for the blanket direct payments that we had before. So it's such a good example of exactly how you can monetize the biodiversity benefits that brings.
And I think that's a key point there, is because it is a tough climate at the moment. Farm businesses are trying to, manage their cash flow and become resilient. And it's that marrying between, they want to be able to, have a thriving environment around them, but also make a profitable business out of it as well. In terms of biodiversity and monitoring on farm, what tools do you use to evaluate the progress that you're making?
I've founded a local farmer cluster in my area, and through that we've got various sources of funding. We work quite closely with BBOUT, and we've done loads of bird surveys. I'm going to be starting to get funding towards more insect surveys and more of a farm well, we're doing at the moment a natural capital kind of whole farm plan for everyone, and that's the best way. Farm clusters are brilliant. If you haven't got one, start one.
I think that's a really, really good point there.
Yeah.
Because I think it is that collaborative effort,
Yes.
and we can all just learn. Even in this session, we're all learning different things from each other, and I think we really need to embrace that collaborative approach.
I think especially born out of the fact that because all of the new schemes and systems are so complicated, they are such a minefield, and because, as you said, they keep changing so frequently, if you don't keep that dialogue and discussion with the people around you, it is really easy to get lost in the fog of what's going on. Whereas when you can sit down and discuss it and talk it through with other people in a similar situation to you, I find it's a really good way to sort of find your way through the weeds and get to sort of more tangible ideas of what you can be doing on farm. And the best way is to learn what people are doing around you.
Yeah, and I would say to second that, like at home we're a fairly small farm, you know, we can't afford all of the kit under the sun to do all of these different options. So actually being in contact with your neighbours, seeing what they're doing, we work very closely with our neighbour at home. He bought a direct drill and we've been dabbling with that, you know, so I think it's important to know what other people are doing around you and to, you know, use your farming neighbours and let them use some of your kit and stuff.
In terms of challenges that you found, in terms of integrating regenerative farming practices on farm, has there been any key challenges that you found, and how have you overcome those hurdles?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is the 5 inches between your ears. See it all the time. It's 100%, it's a mindset change. You need to think about it differently. That's the easiest but the harshest way to say, but yeah. You often quite need an outside opinion, someone to challenge you, someone to ask why, how, and that's probably the best way to go around it.
We've said about that point about mindset change. Obviously, you know, you are the next generation of farmers. How have you found that with your older counterparts on farm, like trying to kind of nurture that mindset change? Have they been very welcoming to that, or have you had to kind of support that process?
I would say I bring a lot of energy for it at home, for, you know, discussions around the kitchen table. But I would say, you know, mum and dad are definitely listening and they're interested in it. And I think, you know, it's progressing forward, and I think it is the way forward. Yeah. You know, Groundswell has only grown and grown, and there's a reason for that. You know, the soil beneath us is, you know, it's where everything comes from. So it's important that we start looking after it a little bit better, and yeah, nurturing biodiversity, because it's hand in hand. You know,
they're all integrated, isn't it? Because obviously, if we're looking after our soils, and essentially we are obviously nurturing our biodiversity as well. It's all integrated too. We need.
I think it is really important as well. When the reason we are going through this change at the moment, there are really important reasons behind it, both from a climate perspective, also from a farm business sustainability perspective. And that's what I found on the farm at home with my parents and with the estate that I also work as an advisor for. I find you need to be able to justify the actions that you're proposing to take. They have to be financially and business, they have to be sensible business decisions. They can't just be driven out purely from sort of a fantasy desire to achieve things that you can't justify. So I feel like doing it, that's how I have found with mum and dad especially, is if you can make the business case as to why making these changes are both sensible for the environment and for the sustainability financially of the farm and the longevity of the farm, then suddenly it's really a lot more difficult for them to have arguments against it. Yeah. And it's a much easier way to bring them on board, and they can really see the positives and actually want to get involved. We've moved to a strip till system on the farm at home, which, you know, my dad was someone who we ploughed every inch of the farm. We probably powered it twice a lot of the time. You know, we were beating our soils to pieces. We're on really heavy clay. They're difficult soils to manage. But actually, since we've moved to the strip till system, we have, over the last 5 years, seen a huge benefit, both in terms of how we manage the farm, labour, fuel, all of these kind of costs have really been improved, and our soils are improving massively as well. So the benefits are across the board, and we are seeing that in practice.
Ben mentioned, when I put the question around monitoring and evaluation of biodiversity on farm, about cluster groups, you said, and you know, collecting data as a whole. What are you doing specifically on your farm, Mike?
I wish I could say that we were doing similar things in terms of bird counts and insect counts and things like that, because I think it is vitally important. And
because I think it's something that, you know, if you're doing the work, like anything, we need to be evaluating it and the progress being made on
it's
farm.
one of the key reasons why. So I don't say that we are a regenerative farm because I don't feel yet able to justify that we are meeting all of the sort of target areas around what makes a system regenerative. I say we're on the regenerative journey and we're trying to implement lots of those activities on farm. Until we have a better way of measuring it and quantifying it, I don't want to sort of make that claim. I think it undermines what regen could be in the future. We are doing a lot more invasive soil testing and monitoring, soil carbon organic matter, for example. We are working towards carbon benching the whole farm. And yeah, I would really like to be doing more bird counts and insect counts in terms of quantifying the biodiversity gain on the farm. It's just finding the time and people to do it. So I get really jealous when people start like showing those figures of improvements, because
But I get that gives you that kind of drive and motivation. You come away from events like today and you go back on farm, you're like, wow, I've learned that, and then see how you can.
And purely observationally, like I see a massive difference on the farm in lots of the bird feeder mixes that we're doing, the pollinator mixes. You see the biodiversity there, so I can see a difference. I just want to be able to put numbers behind it.
It's tough. It's tough to quantify, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we had our first pair of lapwings that fledged the nest this year, and we've had loads nesting for years and years and years, but they get mobbed by kites and buzzards and eaten by badgers. But but you can't see a lot. You can see a lot of it, but how you quantify it, I don't know. But I know there's more bird life on the farm because I see it.
Yeah. And I guess that gives you that satisfaction that morning when you see that. In terms of livestock and grazing livestock, how can we adapt that to improve biodiversity on farm?
Well, we no longer have any of our own sheep on the farm anymore, but we have 4 shepherds. The easiest way to improve biodiversity, I would say, is to start introducing winter cover crops into an arable rotation. If you're more of a livestock grass system anyway, herbal lays is the obvious. But get a shepherd that knows what you want to achieve. Don't get a shepherd that will just chuck a load of sheep in your field, graze it to the dirt, and then move on. You need to get a shepherd that will understand what you're actually trying to achieve, and that's the best way to go about it.
That links back to what you were saying before in terms of working collaboratively as well, and why cluster groups and things like that are so important, because actually I think going forward more and more with farms becoming more diverse in terms of the structure of how the farm works, not every farm has all the skills to do all of the things that are going to be required. So rather than a passionate arable farmer trying to become a shepherd, don't bother doing that. Work with really passionate shepherds in your area, help build other people's businesses up and work together, and that is a much more productive way for everyone to sort of build these systems rather than just trying to do everything in-house.
Yeah. I would say back to herbal lays, we've put a lot of GS4 or what is now SAM3 with the SFI in, and I mean obviously depends on your farm and your soils, but we're finding it really good for the soil and good for grazing, good for silage, really productive, and obviously helping biodiversity at the same time. So we found that a great success on the farm at home.
Perfect. And in terms of kind of how much of a risk is biodiversity lost in terms of food production? You know, we talk a lot about food security and food production. Obviously, in the current climate, we've just had the Ukraine war is still ongoing. Food security really is in the spotlight. So, what part does biodiversity play in terms of protecting our food production, our domestic food production?
I think there is a big risk with biodiversity in sort of the broader context, especially from a political position, in that biodiversity can become quite a buzzword to achieve on its own in isolation, especially with the structures around government policy whereby environmental targets have to be met, but food production does not. It's really easy for the government to tick lots of boxes by saying that they have been helping to improve biodiversity without seeing the impact that that has on food production. So that's the risk. I think there is a massive opportunity that you can increase biodiversity in all the ways that we've been discussing while supporting food production. So I think that is a really big ask of government, especially with my NFU hat on, is something that we have been lobbying government for a long time, and there has been progress made. There's been a good acknowledgement of that, national security is food security. So the risk is that biodiversity and food production are in competition, and it does not have to be that way. And I think movements like Regen and Groundswell are really showing both sides of that argument, why we can come together and achieve both in a one succinct way, and not sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah, I would second that on Mike. What Mike was saying, there's a lot of pen pushes in Westminster, and I think we can't forget that actually farmers know their land better than anyone. Most of the time they've been on it for decades, years, and actually they have probably unknowingly been monitoring, biodiversity on farm, maybe not with such a strong focus on it, it's a buzzword now, but actually, knowing about your lapwings or knowing about your insects, actually historically that's something that, you keep an eye on farm all the time because it's something that you're interested in. And I think it's important to recognise that it doesn't have to be the whole farm that gets sacrificed or food production that gets sacrificed. The fact that they can work hand in hand and recognising that and where you can implement it on farm is really important.
And would you say, we talked about cluster groups and collaboration, but working with organisations like wildlife groups and understanding your area in terms of wildlife and what needs to improve and where the declines are, do you think that's important?
Yeah, definitely. We would do, a big bird count each year and stuff like that. And definitely, I think, like we were going back to saying, it's difficult to quantify, and historically, it's difficult to measure. And actually, there's all these different calculators and what have you out there. But maybe we need something more standardised so we can actually measure it and start tracking how biodiversity is improving on farm.
I think working with those type of groups as well is super important because, going back to my previous point, it is easy to become polarised and be arguing against each other.
When actually you're both trying to achieve the same
we both
thing.
want the same aim,
Yes.
and it's so important that we remember that we are all working towards the same aim. We might have slightly different views on how we get there, but actually by working collaboratively it is the best possible way. And the last thing I want to see is for the UK to achieve our net zero goals and biodiversity goals by offshoring all of our food production to other countries and other systems that are producing it in a way that is actually damaging biodiversity and increasing emissions. And we are part of the global environment, and if we can't just fix our own problems by pushing them off elsewhere, that just doesn't work. So we need to be really conscious of that and hold the government to account in not allowing that to happen and blowing all their own whistles by saying, oh, we've achieved these wonderful things, but meanwhile food productions in the UK is cut by half and it's coming from much worse, more damaging systems. So that's really important and why we need to work with those types of organisations together.
It's obviously worth noting at this point we are in a general election, so obviously there are pledges being made by various parties in terms of a food security index. National security is food security, so obviously time will tell in terms of how that evolves once we know who gets behind number 10.
We will
was
see.
there anything
Hey.
you wanted to add there, Ben, in terms of
there is a bit of a divide, or at least there is perceived to be quite a divide between farmer and wildlife group, let's say. But it's quite funny, and all the experiences I've had, if you actually talk to them, you'll realise that you have a lot more in common with them, and you don't disagree with that much. It might be little bits, but that's it, that's part of learning. But you actually get along with quite a lot of stuff and think about getting to certain goals or objectives the same way, and it's quite funny.
And what a great point to build on to achieve
but
those
it's so,
things.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's so important not to have that polarised debate and actually work closely together for those long-term outcomes.
Exactly, and that outside opinion with a different perspective can be really helpful.
And that leads quite nicely on the next point, actually, Ben, in terms of that narrative to the general public around biodiversity and what farmers are doing, because some farmers are getting quite a lot of stick at the moment as a whole as the sector, and do you think we are doing enough to get that messaging out there, that narrative out there of the fantastic stuff that we're doing on farm to protect the wildlife?
I think historically,
And how can we cut through that?
I think to a degree we actually are cutting through, and I think farmers, we listen to all of the bad things, and it's harder to listen to the good things when they're happening. The NFU have polling data on the general public for the last 2 years in a row that put farmers second only behind nurses as the industry that the public perceives most positively. I think actually, especially in the last 5 years since COVID, consumers really are seeing the importance of food. People really do look for British labelling on food, sustainable food. I think it really matters to them. There are points of contention and disagreement, but actually I feel we do fret on those too much, and we don't acknowledge how much we are supported. And I think continuing to put that positive message across in terms of all the good things we're doing around biodiversity and habitat creation and so on to the public, and why buying British food helps to support that system. We are getting those messages out, and the public are listening to them, and we need to keep pushing that and carrying on with it. And I don't think we should be too negative, thinking everyone hates us, because the polling data does not show that to be the case.
No, but it's just really shouting about the work that we're doing on farm. I think is so important.
Perhaps don't believe everything you see on social media. It
Oh,
can
absolutely.
often
I think
be
that's a very good
quite
point. Very
polarised
good point.
and perhaps put there to get a reaction.
Yes,
I
no,
think,
I think that's a very good
is
point.
the best way.
I think, I was just going to say, I think historically we haven't, like as an industry, we're not very good about, shouting about what we do and celebrating what we do and telling people about what we do. And I think as an industry, and maybe that will probably need other beneficiaries to help, we really need to push that so the public understand how their food is being produced in the UK, and why it is some of the best food that you can buy on the planet.
Definitely. And conversations like this are doing exactly that. The more that the public can hear this type of all the things that us three are doing on farms, I think the public love to hear that and are fascinated by it. So
it's a story at the end of the day, and the stories
100%.
sell, don't they?
And
But
they're
it's
all
getting them out there.
individual stories. That's the thing. There's such a dynamic landscape out there of each farm doing different things. So I just wanted to end on one final question in terms of biodiversity. One thing on your farm that you are particularly proud of?
So I think the proudest thing I think is probably our herbal ley integration. The herbal leys are glorious things, and when they're in full flower throughout the year, they look fantastic. And all the different plant species that we've got established in them, and I know the different health benefits they're bringing to our livestock, digging in the soil and seeing the rooting structures that are created, I get really excited about that, and I find
I can tell from your face.
it's just something, it's very visual when you're on the farm. And that really makes me feel very passionate and gives me a big boost. So I feel proud about that. We're not doing it enough, and so I want to incorporate it more and more on the farm, and I look forward to doing that.
Brilliant. And Ben?
Winter bird food pots for me, they are brilliant. They are absolutely full of life. I love them. They flower all spring, look amazing, smell amazing, then they provide seeds all winter. We also do supplementary bird feeding as well. And the amount of, I don't know what half of them are, little brown jobbies that are flying around is blimmin' brilliant. Yeah, and I love seeing it.
I would say I've been doing a fair bit of hedgerow planting, and I think that has been a really big boost on the farm. And just seeing them shoot up and go green this spring has been great, and it's something I'd like to continue doing, and focusing on hedgerow management, because I think often they're neglected and they shouldn't be. They're a big part of the farm. So
it's next on my list too.
Yeah,
hedgerow
there we go.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for contributing to the discussion, and have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you very much.